So thank you all for coming, and we have Representative Walter Hudson with us tonight. And before we start, I want to give you a couple announcements, and then I've got a song for you. So let me get to my calendar quick. I want you to know that November, December, we're not going to have a Friday night Faith and Freedom, but on November 18th, we have someone coming here to talk about how can we actually assert the Constitution. So it's a really cool thing, and I can't explain it. That's why he's coming. But there is a form that you can fill out where you can write your grievance. So if you see something that's unconstitutional, you can state the facts, why that is unconstitutional, put it on paper. It's a formal document, it's a legal document, and you can serve that to your school board, to your sheriff, to your county commissioners, and it's a legal document now, so they have to deal with it. You can say it, but then they can ignore you, but this is like a document, right? And so now they have to deal with it, and then they have to respond as to why they feel it is constitutional. So you actually have a dialogue now. And so there have been some that have served the Supreme Court, and they've been able to make some headway with the Supreme Court even. So they're going to be talking about that on November 18th. It's a Monday night. And then afterwards, I've been talking with Dale Witherington, and so I told him, I says, we did a Constitution class I think last winter. So we looked at the U.S. Constitution, but I said, I've never read the Minnesota Constitution. Have any of you? You have? Good job. You have? So, that's another, we can hold our elected officials accountable to the Minnesota Constitution if we've read it ourselves, right? So I'm working with Dale, and he may come and teach a class on the Minnesota Constitution like in January, February. So yeah, so then we will be able to know our rights and be ready to assert them. That's a founding father quote. That's all I know, though. But that is what we need to do, right? I mean, when we know what's right, we just need to remind the people around us that this is where it is written, right? It is written. So that's what's cooking for next month and early into next year. And then we'll just see what happens. We kind of have something going on in a few weeks here, so that's going to change a lot of things, right? So we'll just see what pops up from here as far as speakers and the information that we need to know. So that's how we roll for the last 2 years. That's how we roll. It's like, what do we need to know? And then you bring someone in to talk about it. So is there any other announcements or questions that you all have for the group? Nope? Yes?
We saw the movie this week,
Here.
She's loud enough. The Average Joe movie. So at the end of it was really cool because he brought it. So he's the coach that prayed on the field and went to court, and he went all the way to Supreme Court and won. Yep, Joe Kennedy. So it's The Average Joe is the name of the movie. It's in the theaters right now. I'd encourage you to go, because at the end of the movie he says that they turn things around. Like, we have more religious freedom right now than we have had for 50 years because of what Joe Kennedy did and how he fought back. And his story is really amazing. Grew up in foster care, adopted, and God has used him mightily. So I'd encourage you to go support the movie theater.
And its name again?
Average Joe. St. Michael, we went to it. I think it's in Rogers. It probably won't show very long, so I'd encourage you to go and watch it. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Good reminder. Anything else from anyone else? Okay, then are you ready to play the song? All right. Let me open in prayer. Lord Jesus, we are grateful, Lord, that you have us here for such a time as this, that we are able to stand and speak truth, and we stand for our rights. We stand for our Constitution. And Lord, we pray that your hand will be upon our country, Lord, that you will cause evil to fall, and that you will lift up the righteous. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, a couple more things I thought of. I do have Trump signs in the back if anyone wants to bring a Trump sign home with them, or they know a neighbor or a friend, or they don't do any good sitting on the counter. So go ahead and take what you can. And we have Mary Amla with us tonight. If anyone's interested in door knocking and to get out the vote, they have an app. They have tons of help. So if you have time to door knock or to phone call. So if you just want to do like 10 calls a night, you're just reminding people, hey, you should probably vote this year. Could you please vote this year? It's important you vote this year. So talk to Mary afterwards if you have any questions and you want to get involved in that way. I have a friend, they door knock 5 doors every night. That's just what they do. They just 5 doors and go home, and next night 5 doors. And much easier with phone calling. You can do 10 then, maybe 20. Yes. So, and these are our friendly phone calls, essentially. So it's not too scary. So talk to Mary. And let's see. I think that's it. Okay. So we will now have Representative Walter Hudson come up and speak. We're very grateful for that you're here for that. And lots of things have been going on in the state the past couple of years, so I'm sure he's got plenty to say. Thank you, Walter.
Thank you for allowing me to speak to you tonight. I'm going to start with life just because it's on my mind today. I had an interview that I recorded with, some of you may know Karen Miller. She's an activist from down south who's done a lot of work. She has a Substack chronicling what happened over the past 2 years. And we went on a show on if you guys are familiar with Brandon House and Worldview Weekend, he has a network, and one of the shows on there is the Tamara Scott Show. And we went on there for an hour and talked about this. So it's kind of top of mind, so I thought I'd start there. Tim Walz. Isn't it funny how you don't even have to, you just have to say the name, right? You just have to say the name. So Tim Walz, he went on that vice presidential debate and he made the absolutely ludicrous claim, which he forwarded again, and I believe it was his Fox News interview, that the laws that he signed don't in fact allow for the abortion of a fully gestational age child at 40 weeks in the 9th month. That's not what the bill says, he told us. That's not what the bill says. Now, let me tell you, because the first mistake we shouldn't make, one of the mistakes we shouldn't make, is assuming that these people are stupid. They are not. They are very smart. They are very devious. They know exactly what they're doing. They speak with intention. So what was the intention behind Tim Walz claiming that the law doesn't do what it obviously does? Confusion. It's the assumption, and it's a very cynical ploy, because what he's assuming is that you're stupid. What he's assuming is that you don't understand how the law works. So when he says the law doesn't say that, in his head, probably his defense of that, like if somebody pinned him down and said, well, what do you mean it doesn't say that? He would probably say something to the effect of, well, the law doesn't say that you can suck out a baby's brains at 40 weeks gestational age. Those words are not in the bill, right? But what matters in law is the effect that it has. What was the effect of HF1? What was the effect of HF 94, which was the other big abortion bill that they incorporated into their health omnibus? What is the effect of statutory language when taken into consideration with all other statute? And the effect of the laws that he signed, that he made real in this state and that are enacted right now, the effect is that indeed, not only can you suck the brains out of a 40-week gestational age baby in the womb, do a partial birth abortion, bring them halfway out, because as long as some part of them is in there, then there's still a clump of cells. Tens of thousands of cells, but, cells nonetheless, right? Technically correct. Not only can you do that, you can also have a baby born alive as a result of a botched abortion and then watch it die from neglect and exposure on a medical table. Now, what's their defense of that? Well, they say, well, come on now. You guys are overreacting. Just because we literally struck a line through the words that say life-saving care and replaced it with the word care, that doesn't mean necessarily what you think it means. That doesn't mean what you logically interpret that statutory language to imply. But care could be literally anything. Care could be patting the newborn infant on the head and saying, they're there as they die without effective medical intervention to save their life. That's the status quo in Minnesota. Now, what possible good news could we glean from that? Well, I'll tell you. The good news is that by virtue of the stance and position and posture that Tim Walz and his running mate Kamala Harris and all of their Democrat and aligned friends have taken on this issue, the fact that they're backing away from it, the fact that they're trying to confuse you, the fact that they're lying about it, it tells you that they know. They know multiple things. They know that what they did was morally abhorrent. They know that what they did was evil. And they know that it is politically unpalatable. They know that the residents of Minnesota, the voters of Minnesota, the people don't agree with it. Now, that's a remarkable thing to realize because in 2022, this was their basically only issue. This was all they were talking about. And we anticipated the big red wave that was supposed to come in 22, right? And I think broadly speaking, the conventional wisdom is there were two reasons why that didn't happen. One, election administration. And there's subpoints to that I could go into. But the second thing is this abortion issue, right? The Dobbs decision and the impact that that had on the culture shock of Roe v. Wade being overturned, which wasn't on my bingo card. I wanted it to happen, never thought I'd see it, and here we are. Fantastic news for those of us who are pro-life, but it is manifested in a very toxic way here in the state of Minnesota. And they ran hard on that issue. It was their one big issue, and it worked for them. And they were so confident coming out of earning the trifecta that they decided to make this House File 1. All the bills are numbered based upon the order in which they're introduced, or the order in which they're processed, at least. And so, and when a caucus comes in, like if Republicans take over the House, which I believe we will, we'll get into that later, it won't be an accident, whatever our House File 1 is, that'll be very intentional, of we're trying to send a message of this is our priority. This is what we're interested in delivering for the people of Minnesota. For the Democrats in 2023, that was HF1, the PRO Act, protecting reproductive options, the abortion bill. It was their number one priority. It was the same thing in the Senate. Senate File 1. This was their number one priority. Before, let's list the many things that could have come higher on the list, right? Public safety, education, 50% of kids who can't read at grade level or do math at grade level. Taxes, spending, returning the surplus. $18 billion to $20 billion, depending upon who you ask and what calculations they're using. They didn't want to focus on any of that. How about this one? Repealing the Social Security tax fully, so as to not punish our elders again. Because if you've lived long enough, you've spent a lot of time being punished, right? That wasn't a priority. In fact, they never did it in 2 years. This was their top priority, making sure we paved the way. Ironically, I don't know how many of you may be familiar with Ayn Rand, or if you are, how deeply you're familiar with her. But this is the one area of life, this and so-called gender-affirming care. These are the two areas of public policy where the Democrats actually agree that government should have nothing to say about it. They created a space of total anarchy in prenatal care. See no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil. It doesn't exist. I got a text today in the middle of something from a gal who's helping with a campaign on the east side of town. And her candidate was apparently in a candidate forum today, a debate. And her opponent, who's a Democrat, an incumbent, was trying to make the claim that has been made multiple times by these liars that, oh, that doesn't happen. We don't have babies born alive and left to die. I texted her back. We had 5 in 2021. And the reason I know that is because Tim Walz's own administration put out the report saying that there were 5 babies born alive as a result of botched abortions. The reason why they put out that report is they required by law. The law that required them to do it was the Infant Born Alive Protection Act. Guess what they repealed? So going forward, and again, this comes back to the point about Tim Walz and his party thinking you're stupid, hoping you're stupid, hoping you're not engaged, hoping you don't understand civics, hoping that you can't read and comprehend words on paper. They repealed the mechanism through which we will ever know the horrors of what's taking place in our state under the auspices of reproductive care, reproductive health care, as they call it, going forward. So we're not going to have those numbers anymore. We're not going to know whether it's 12,000 people who were killed before they were born, or whether it's up to 15 or 17. We're not going to know how many babies are left to die on a medical table. We're just not going to count it. It's none of your business. Mind your own damn business, as Tim Walz says, right? Don't worry about life, death, murder, killing. Not something that's in the scope of your concern. That's where we're at. And so that's where my head's at right now, is on that issue. But that issue and a dozen others that we could talk about, and the way that it was handled, the way that it was approached by the Democrat trifecta, really is indicative of a narcissistic, arrogant, and undemocratic process that was embraced by the legislative majority and by Tim Walz over these last 2 years. And I firmly believe, looking back retroactively, because let me share this with you. So I get elected first term, 2022. In the space between election day and when the first day of a session of a new term starts, you've got all these, we call them freshman members, first term members, right? They all need to get oriented. And there are different processes and events. Some of them are partisan. Some of them are, if you're a Republican, you hang out with the Republicans and they tell you what you need to know about this, that, and the other thing. A lot of them are put on by the House of Representatives. And so it's Republicans and Democrats all together. And one of the recurrent themes through this process in 2022, leading up to the legislative session in 2023, was the importance of maintaining good relationships with your colleagues, right? That, somebody who's your opponent on one issue may end up being your friend on the next one, so be careful. Don't push too hard. Don't be too mean. Don't burn bridges. It's my firm belief that on election night in 2022, as soon as they realized what they had, as soon as they realized they had the trifecta, the decision was made that they were going to betray all of that, that they weren't going to work with Republicans at all. At all. Now, there were a few exceptions to that occurred over the course of the session, but they were organic. It was Democrats breaking ranks. Perhaps not on votes. There wasn't a lot of that. But at least in terms of being willing to have a conversation, being willing to talk to you in the retiring room or in a corridor or on the sides of a committee hearing room or whatever the case may be, or maybe even in an office, and consider what you had to say. There was a little bit of that. But as an institution, from leadership on the way down, the decision was very clearly imposed that we're not taking anything these people have to say seriously at all, and we're not going to incorporate any of their ideas into what it is that we're doing. Now, that bared out. You saw it if you watched any of the committee hearings, the House floor debates, particularly on this issue, HF1, rejecting our amendments left and right, rolling their eyes. I mean, I wish you could have seen it from my perspective, because the cameras on the House floor focus on the person who's speaking, so you only get that headshot, right? But through my eyes, I could see their body language and their facial expressions and how they reacted to truth being told. And I have to tell you, I don't expect to ever know what it's like to be in hell and to watch demons writhe. But I imagine that what I often saw on the House floor is very similar. Like physical reactions to the truth that were somewhere on a spectrum between open mockery, disdain, to godly fear, right? Like even the demons cast out by Christ expressed a certain degree of reverence, right? For the power that they were in front of, that they were confronted with. And we share an echo of that, a shadow of that when we speak truth, right? And so when you confront evil with light, there's a reaction. And that's what I saw on the House floor. I recently heard a story that really drives this point home. I was up north in Hubbard County speaking to a group up there of Republicans, and the local representatives, Senator Steve Green and Representative Matt Bliss, talked about how they both represent districts that include tribal nations and communities affected by tribal relations. One of the provisions that was being considered, didn't make it through, thankfully, was in the category of what they call land back. So they were trying to take land, state-owned land, and in some cases, I believe, private land, and give it to the tribes. Now, this has happened in some places, resulting in people's personal property literally being isolated. Tribes have cut off roads and kept people from being able to get to their own homes. Okay, this has happened. And so it was a big deal. Guess who wasn't even consulted before the bill dropped? Now, if you believed in democracy, if you believed in representative government, if you were operating in good faith, then you would consult people on the other side of the aisle when you're presenting something that is going to have a direct and indeed profound impact upon the constituents who they represent. That is, if you care about those people. And my point to the folks up north was, they don't. I will never stand for being lectured about compassion from these people, ever. Because they have too frequently and consistently demonstrated that they have none. You have to have zero compassion to pass HF1. You have to have zero compassion to pass HF 94, which got rid of the Infant Born Alive Protection Act. You have to have zero compassion to introduce a bill that could potentially take somebody's home away from them without having the courtesy of notifying their elected representative. You have to have zero compassion in order to cram through business mandates, such as the paid family medical leave bill, which doesn't sound wonderful. Doesn't everybody want paid family medical leave? Well, sure, that'd be great. I'd also like $1 billion, right? Can you give me that? But what is the impact of passing such policy? The impact is that literally every employer, regardless of size, so if you hire one person, you're bound by this provision, which has not gone into effect yet, but it will next year, I believe, to provide them with up to, I believe it's 24 weeks off during the course of a year, which for those who are counting, that's about half the year, right? Non-contiguous, so it could be a day here, a week there, a month there, right? And you get no say in it. Somebody says they're going to take it, they just get it. Day of, could be, I used to be, prior to getting into this racket of politics, I was a operations manager for a small business that contracts with FedEx. And so it was my job every night to put together the routes, assign the drivers, make the plan. Now, on more than one occasion, I would wake up in the morning, go into the terminal, and discover around about 11 o'clock that a driver just wasn't gonna show up. And then guess who had to go and drive their route? Yeah. So my day goes from whatever it was that I had planned to that until 9 o'clock at night, 10 o'clock at night. And then, by the way, getting home and planning the next day, right? What this law would provide is for that to be just rampant with no consequences. You can't retaliate. You can't punish them. You can't say, well, this is unacceptable. Our organization can't operate like this. We're going to go out of business. And those folks in particular, you know, these independent contractors who are kind of like a buffer between a big corporation like FedEx and the drivers on the ground, they're going to be in a real pincer with this thing because they are contractually obligated to ensure that every package gets delivered every day on time. And you can't do that if people aren't showing up. And it takes a long time to onboard somebody, to even find somebody who wants to be onboarded. A lot of times you get halfway through the process and they decide it's not for them. So how are we going to fix that? Well, I'll tell you how we're not gonna. With temporary staffing. You know how I know that? Because I went to a I-94 Chamber of Commerce meeting. A room like this filled with business owners, managers, business people. Not happy about what's happened over the past couple of years. And this was one of their big issues that they kept bringing up. One of them sent me an email the next morning, and she said that if this provision, the Paid Family Medical Leave Act, is unaltered, that they are going to be forced to add Minnesota to their list of states, which right now only includes 2 others, Colorado and California, that they will not do business in. That's a temporary staffer. That's a person, that's a company that finds people to plug the holes when there's a hole. Okay? So what we've done is we've created a process by which companies, due to no fault of their own, are not going to be able to fulfill their workforce issues, which, by the way, common thread through every sector of the economy that I, and I know others, heard at the legislature, workforce, workforce, workforce. It's a problem now. And they're making it worse. Exponentially worse. Not very compassionate. What do you think the impact is going to be on the economy of something like that? Your packages start not showing up. I mean, that's just my example. Go down the list of literally everything. Nursing, hospitals, emergency services. This applies to, like I said, literally every employer, your city, your county, your school district. I was on the city council in Albertville for 7 years. Every year we would get an audit, and one of the common pieces of feedback that we got every single year was that you guys lack segregation of responsibility in fiscal matters, which is a fancy way of saying you don't have enough people to responsibly sort out all of the financial responsibilities in order to have best practices to avoid problems, right? Like if the same person is responsible for too much, the temptation is there for them to do bad things. That's basically the feedback. Well, that wasn't intentional. It wasn't mismanagement on our part. We don't have the budget to hire 15 people to look at our budget or to manage our finances. Instead, we have a finance director, one gal. She does it all. Knows where all the financial bodies are buried. What happens to the city of Albertville if she goes out for 24 weeks? Even if you were to replace her with somebody who on paper is more qualified and a better fit for the job, that person wouldn't know where the bathrooms are. Okay? That person wouldn't know which file to look in, which drawer to pull out to find information. So the institutional knowledge that employees have is a tremendous asset. And we're just going to ignore that, right? City's just going to have to deal with it. School district's just going to have to deal with it. And that was their prevailing sentiment every time we brought up any of these concerns with any of these mandates is people are just going to have to figure out a way to deal with it. They're just going to have to deal with it because you know what? We're compassionate. And we feel for the people. People deserve to have time off when they need it in order to care for a loved one or literally anybody. I mean, one of the aspects of this law that they passed is that you can take time off to take care of somebody who has like a family affinity. So if you have a best friend or a neighbor or the cousin of your best friend's neighbor who you want to call your family, you can use them as an excuse. I mean, gone is the day of, for the 12th time this year, claiming your grandma died. Now you can say, well, there's a guy across town whose, kid fell down a well and I need to go dig him out, right? And there's no verification, there's no requirement to actually demonstrate that any of this is legitimate. And as you're walking out the door as that employee, the guy next to you can be like, you know what, I do too. I'm going to go help him. And then you could have 5 people walk out the door. Nothing to stop them. This is their version of compassion. And through the legislative process of considering these types of provisions, there was no consideration whatsoever of what the actual impact of any of these laws is going to be. And we're seeing it in the trajectory of outward migration from this state. Not just in terms of people. I want to say it was in between 21 and 22, before these laws were passed, we lost a net, I want to say 13,000, that might be wrong, people. But more importantly, we lost their money. $1.9 billion walked across state lines. Do you think that number's going to go up or down after the last 2 years? And this is what they don't care about is, they spent, when we talk about you've all heard about the surplus. They spent the $18 billion. They raised taxes by $10 billion. They increased the state budget by 40%. 40. Those things are audacious on their face, but even more so when you take into consideration the fact that a large portion, I believe it's 12 billion of the 18 that was surplus, was one-time money from the federal government. Remember COVID? So you tell me, you win the lottery and you take your winnings and you have a plan to spend it all immediately. But not just spend it all. You're going to set up long-term expenses. You're going to buy a house. You're going to buy cars, multiples. You're going to take out loans based upon the fact that you have this money available today. But you have no plan whatsoever for how you're going to fund it the next year or the year after that or the decade after that. No plan. In point of fact, you have very good reason to believe that your income's actually going to go down because you've gotten a little lazy at work since you hit the jackpot, right? That's where we're at as a state. Our available income is literally going down, and they just created a new department, state agency, the Department for Children, Youth, and Families. They're spending $750 million on a new state office building. Meanwhile, that same amount of money is needed in bonding in order to bring our correction system just up to fair. Not good, not okay. Fair. Not happening. I think the actual amount they ended up allocating to that was around 80 million, a fraction. So, I mean, the level of irresponsibility and recklessness that it was on display by the Democrats is unbelievable. It's literally unbelievable. In fact, that was one of the top issues that I and my fellow legislators had over the course of this past 2 years, is conveying what is happening without people being like, nah, that can't be. Nobody's that stupid. Nobody's that evil. Nobody's that reckless and irresponsible. You must be exaggerating for political effect. It's not an exaggeration. And so, here we are. Here we find ourselves, 2024, a couple weeks out from the election. The good news is, there's good news. I very much anticipate that we're going to have a very good night on November 5th. Every new piece of information that I hear is better than the last piece of information that I heard regarding the momentum, the trajectory, the direction things are going. I want to say that of the swing districts in the House, I think they were looking at 7 of them. 6 of the 7 are either tied or we're ahead. You expand that out to 10, 3 of the other 4, same deal. We're within striking distance. Trump is doing amazing. Harris is not. You can detect the visceral panic on the left about the direction things are going. They anticipate losing. There was a great clip that was making the rounds yesterday of Joe Biden and Barack Obama at a funeral service, and you couldn't hear what they were saying, but you could read it on their faces. Okay, this is where they're at. Now, the danger in these positive indicators is for you to sit here, take it in, and assume everything's cool. I don't have to do any more, right? That's the wrong approach. It's a little bit like, well, when I'm coming here today. Actually, I didn't have to use GPS. I've been here enough times that now I just know. But, you're using your GPS to get somewhere, and it tells you you're on track to make it by 7:05. Does that mean you can go to sleep behind the wheel? No. You got to keep your hand on the steering wheel. You got to keep your foot on the pedal. It's calculating what will happen if you keep it up. That's where we're at. So we need to keep it up. And one person who can help you do that is sitting right here, Mary Amlaw, with Trump Force 47. If you're not already a Trump Force captain, talk to her before the end of the night. It's not a big ask. Are you guys still giving like 25 lists of 25? Is that where it's at, or has it changed? Okay. Any number you want. And the reason it's any number you want is because the corn is high and the harvest is ready to bring in, right? And so we need the workers to do it. Minnesota, I firmly believe, is not a blue state. And my reasoning for that is that if you look House district by House district, we've got anywhere between 2,500 and 3,500 conservative voters who did not vote in 2022. Now, if they had came out, we would have fired Keith Ellison. We would have fired Julie Blaha, the state auditor. We probably would have had Scott Jensen as governor. I mean, we would have taken it all. We certainly wouldn't have lost the Senate by one district. And we probably wouldn't have lost the House by 4 districts. You talk to people, even apolitical normies, by virtue of the fact that you're here, I hate to break it to you, but you're not a normie. But you talk to normal people, and nobody likes what they've seen over the last 2 years, regardless of their political affiliation. They all think it's abhorrent. They all think it's outside the bounds of acceptability. But they need to vote. And that's what Mary's working on. You can also help your local candidates, your school board candidates, your mayoral candidates, city council, county commissioner. All of them need help, and all of it is crucial. And again, I speak from experience of being on a local board, a city council. I also speak from the experience of watching from my position as a legislator, how school board members have been treated if they don't go along with the Education Minnesota line. We're probably, I don't know what school district we're in here. Is it the Elk River School District? Cambridge, I sent you? Okay, so Elk River, south of you, there are 2 school board members who were censured, John Anderson and Mindy Freiberg, yeah. They were censured by the other members of their board for such crimes as holding town halls, visiting the Capitol to speak with legislators, talking to their voters. Because these things are a violation of a policy that was crafted by the Minnesota School Board Association and has been widely adopted by many school districts and school boards. And the policy effectively means, going back to the whole concept of that's not what it says. Well, this is what it does. What it does is it effectively neuters your political representation in the school board. It obligates them under the auspices of ethics to support whatever it is that the school district does, whatever it is that the school board votes on, whatever it is that the superintendent decides. And if you speak out, if you say, I don't like that, that's not good, this isn't the most effective or responsible use of our resources, while you're acting unethically. How dare you? And that's what they were censured for. So what we need is, and that's something that's really crucial for us to understand here in Minnesota, because if we operate under the false assumption that merely electing a couple of good school board members to the school board is going to result in any sort of meaningful change in how the district conducts its business, it won't. You need to get a majority that is willing to eviscerate these policies and that is willing to tell the state to go to hell when they put down mandates saying that tampons need to be in the boys' bathroom, or that my sons need to be taught to regard one half of their family with suspicion because of the color of their skin, right? This is the reality of what's happening in Minnesota. So it's very crucial to support your candidates, to get them across the line. We need to win this election. We're all in agreement? Yes. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about what happens after the election. I was encouraged to hear that you're going to have a speaker on a later date. I put it on my calendar tentatively to come and talk to you about this initiative, or that's not what it's called, the notice and affidavit process to try to assert your rights and challenge public officials when they're acting unconstitutionally. It's a bold, new idea. Actually, it's not new. It's part of the common law. It's something that's been around forever, but we've forgotten. We're living in a moment that is not unlike that of King Josiah in Israel. As you may recall, and hopefully I'm getting the king right, as you may recall, there was this king who he came to power after his father and his grandfather, who were very bad, unrighteous. They worshiped false gods and encouraged the worship of false gods in the realm. And Josiah desperately thirsted for righteousness. He wanted to restore the land. The problem was there wasn't a copy of the law anywhere, so he didn't have a frame of reference. Like, people didn't even know what the law was that they were supposed to be upholding. And they found one in a dusty room somewhere, a copy of the law. And this was like the best day of Josiah's life. He's like, finally, I get to tear into this thing, find out what God's expectations are, and start to make reforms. And reforms he started to make. He started to tear down the idols. He started to punish evildoers. And he restored righteousness in the land for a time. That's the position that we find ourselves in right now, is we need to know what the law even is. And we think we do, but we don't behave like we do. Because when unconstitutional things happen, they are not binding, not morally, not really legally either. The only reason why it passes, the only reason why it goes into an effect and is upheld is because we remain silent and allow it to happen. So what you're going to hear in November is a methodology for attacking that, for saying, no, you have broken trust. And it's time for the people to set things right. One of the things you'll likely hear in November is reference to, in the Declaration of Independence, it says that when a system of government becomes tyrannical, the people have not just the right, but the duty to change their form of government. It doesn't say anything about waiting for 2 years for the next election. It doesn't say anything about waiting until the next Supreme Court justice retires or passes away. Whenever we have the right and the duty to change it. So I'm glad you guys are going to be looking into that. The other thing that I want to say is that, I spoke earlier about my perception that Minnesota is ripe for harvest, for political harvest, for conservatives and for Republicans. And one of the things that's happened, as long as I've been involved, I think Mary's been involved longer than I have overall. But I got involved with the Tea Party back in the day. That's where I met Mary. And, we were green as green could be, didn't know anything, didn't know what a Robert's Rule was or any of that stuff. But throughout my time being adjacent to and operating within the Republican Party, it's kind of been a mess. And it wasn't always that way, as I understand it. There is a way back. And I very much feel like we've kind of bottomed out and are starting to head in the right direction. But we need to accelerate that in a big way. And that's going to require, at the core of it, what it's really about is relationships. Relationships amongst ourselves, relationships with our neighbors, with our communities, talking to people, empowering people, serving people. You serve people, you engender loyalty, which translates to votes, which translates to power, which you can use to uphold rights. And that's the name of the game. And so that needs to be the focus going forward, because simply rebuking, having the wonderful moment that I sincerely hope we have on November 5th, where Tim Walz not only gets his butt kicked, his clock cleaned in the Electoral College, but also has the indignity of having to return to Minnesota, having seen it flip red for Donald Trump, of all people. As delicious as that moment will be, it is not the finish line. There is no finish line. We're never done. God will tell you when you're done, pretty suddenly. We keep going. We keep fighting. And your commitment to that is the answer to the question of, will it happen? Will it happen? I don't know. You tell me. You committed? You going to be part of it? You're going to build those relationships? You're going to show up? You're going to cast your ballot? You're going to bring a friend? You're going to foster the relationships that translate to that service, that loyalty, that electoral success going forward? If the answer is yes, then of course we're going to do it. I should amend that a little bit. God is going to do it through us, as he always has. We are not the first people to walk through dark times. We are not the first nation to be headed in a very wrong direction and be turned around by his grace. It can happen. So thank you, and I will take any questions you may have.
Talking about the family leave, it's a double whammy, 12 weeks for one thing and 12 weeks for the other. I would think that these corporations like 3M and Mayo Clinic and the health industry here, insurance industry, have huge amounts of employees, right? So the upper management has got to have enough intelligence to look at that and say, we're in trouble. Is there no pushback that you are aware of coming from them?
There is a lawsuit that was put forward by United Healthcare, pushing back against that very provision. To my knowledge, they're the only ones who have stepped up in that regard and pushed back. It's encouraging, but you're right. I mean, it should be everybody. Like, what are you guys doing? Yeah. This is one of the frustrations that my colleagues and I on the Republican side have with a lot of our friends, is that they try to play footsie with the other side because they're afraid of what they're going to do to them if they don't. Which isn't really an earmark of liberty, is it? Right? Not really an earmark of democracy that they claim to care about so much. When people are afraid to cross you because you might take revenge upon them for doing so. I'll give you an example. Back during the pandemic, I was on the city council in Albertville. I brought a resolution for consideration. Had to cram it into the agenda. And I don't remember exactly what it said, but the summary would be, go to hell, Governor Walz. The city is not going to abide by these mandates. None of our resources are going to be expended trying to enforce it, et cetera, et cetera. I was not able to get a second to even have a vote on that. And the arguments that I received in opposition to it were exactly that. If we do this, why? None of our bonding requests are going to be approved. The governor might take his revenge upon the small city of Albertville, 4 square miles with 7,000 people in it. What? We could be punished for upholding our residents' rights.
Right.
For upholding the right to have your business open, to go to church, to educate your child. I mean, these were the most fundamental liberties that we have as human beings. And the concern over upholding them in our positions as lowly city council members was, well, we might not get the cheese from the state. This is the problem, is that people are not willing to stand up because they have, in their view, too much to lose. Now, I don't know what I could possibly lose that would be of greater value than my liberty. My life. That's about it. My kids, my family. And maybe they could take those from you too. They could arrest you. We've seen that happen. The lawfare that's been imposed upon pro-life activists. Just to name one group that they've targeted. So, I mean, it is a real concern. And I don't begrudge anybody from being shrewd in how they decide to confront these issues, but more of us have to be willing to risk something.
Well, the big businesses are risking the loss of their business.
Yeah, right.
So they have to be compelled to push back. Otherwise, the consequence is much terrible. Much more terrible, it seems to me. That's my opinion, of course.
I agree. I don't know what compulsion would prompt them to do that. I think what's more likely to happen is that as we meet with more electoral success and they see a trajectory that empowers what they actually want to see happen, that they'll become bolder.
So where would they be putting their money, do you think, this year? Which party?
They're playing both sides.
Yeah, okay.
Definitely. I mean, every group that's down lobbying at the Capitol is playing both sides to one degree or another. And there's, again, a conventional wisdom that that's the way it needs to be done, because otherwise you're not going to get the meetings. I mean, one of the pieces of feedback that I heard quite a bit when I was down there is how unusual it was for me to take any meeting with anybody who asked. That it was very difficult to get in to see anybody in the majority. I heard rumors, unsubstantiated, that it was very much a pay-to-play scheme, where it was, oh, let me check my campaign finance report real quick and see if your name's on it, and then maybe we can set something up for 15 minutes. Otherwise, you're not on the list. Other questions?
Over here. Oh.
She's, and then I'll get you.
We can get him first.
Oh. I can't think of her name right now. Maybe you're familiar with her case, the coffee shop owner down in Epperly. And I had the opportunity of meeting her before she became a fugitive, and of course they issued a arrest warrant for her, and she did end up going in jail. And but one thing that, and I've heard her talk a few more times after that, but one of the things that struck me really unbelievable was the fact that when she was in the court there is that she tried to reference the U.S. Constitution, and the judge told her you can't do that, you'd be in contempt of court.
Yeah, you'll hear more about that in November. Because my understanding, and I'm very much a neophyte when it comes to what you're going to hear about on the 18th, about this notice and affidavit process, it's common law, fundamental law, they call it process, is that the court system, lawyers don't even get trained in the Constitution when they go to law school. Wouldn't you think that would be like the first class, right? 101, what is the highest law of the land here in the state of Minnesota and in the United States of America? But no, they are trained in arguing statute, arguing case law, arguing precedent. And the Constitution does not fit into any of that. It just doesn't. Well, these guys over here said that it was okay, so it's okay. There's I forget the exact legal terminology, but there's actually like a legal doctrine that prioritizes precedent over other considerations. So when Dred Scott came along, Now, precedents do get overturned, thankfully. We talked about one of them earlier, but it takes a lot. And the unconstitutionality, like the obvious, apparent unconstitutionality of a ruling does not invalidate the ruling according to them, but it should invalidate it according to us, because our rights don't get to be canceled just because the person who says so is wearing a black robe or holds an election certificate or sits in the governor's mansion. And so this is the mentality that has to